The terminal's inspiration Mehran Karimi Nasseri passes away in a Paris airport. He spent 18 years as a refugee in the Charles de Gaulle Airport, sleeping on a bench. His tale served as the basis for a Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg film. Mehran Karimi Nasseri, an Iranian refugee who spent 18 years living in Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport and whose unique life was the inspiration for the 2004 Steven Spielberg film, The Terminal, passed away on Saturday. According to a statement from an airport spokesman, the fatality occurred in Terminal 2F at around midday and the reason was a heart attack. He was in his late 70s, though his exact age was not immediately known. The airport held a special place in Mr. Nasseri's heart even in his last moments. The statement confirmed that although he had been residing at a nursing home this year, he had returned to the airport in the middle of September, to live as a homeless person in the public space of the airport. Mr. Nasseri became an unusual feature in Terminal 1 of the airport as he carried loads of his stuff, packed neatly on a luggage cart. He had a trimmed mustache and a quiet voice. From 1988 to 2006, he lived in the airport, first out of the need to prove his refugee status and then voluntarily. Mr. Nasseri, who carried stacks of his goods that were neatly placed on a luggage cart and had a well-trimmed mustache, became an odd presence in Terminal 1 of the airport. From 1988 through 2006, he lived in the airport, initially due to difficulties in proving his status as a refugee and then out of choice. His days were broken up by the regularity of flights and the presence of travelers, whose numbers increased in the morning and decreased at night, largely leaving him to sleep on his preferred curved bench by himself. He frequently received meal coupons from the airport staff, as well as toiletries from first-class passengers' unused cabin amenities, from the flight attendants. In a 2003 feature of Mr. Nasseri, the New York Times Magazine observed that he appeared both established and ready to move. Mr. Nasseri said in the article, "I know I'm famous. Before I arrived here, I wasn't noteworthy." Due to his changing claims about his origins, his story turned into a peculiar one in the history of immigration, and several facts about his background remain difficult to establish. He denied being Iranian and dodged inquiries regarding his early years in Tehran. Airport officials claimed they had proof that Mr. Nasseri was actually born in 1945 in the Iranian town of Masjid-i-Sulayman. Early on, he claimed that his protests against the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi government while a student in England resulted to his expulsion from his native country in 1977 for opposition action. When he returned to Iran, he found himself imprisoned and soon banished, he said. Before arriving in Belgium, where he was granted official refugee status in 1981, he wandered about Europe for a few years on temporary refugee credentials. Before 1988, when he landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport with a one-way ticket to London, a few clothing, around $500, and no passport, Mr. Nasseri had no trouble traveling to Britain or France. He reported that his documents had been taken from a Paris railway station to the airport officials. The authorities allowed him to take off for Heathrow Airport in London without following the standard protocols. But there, he was denied entry by British immigration agents, and he was sent back to Charles de Gaulle. Mr. Nasseri entered the airport's holding room for people without papers because he was unable to provide identification or documentation proving his refugee status. He stayed for several days, followed by weeks and months. As the months grew into years, Mr. Nasseri found himself trapped in a gray area of the law. The French government argued that he was staying on French soil against the law in the 1990s, but they were unable to deport him since no country would take him. He was given permission to leave the airport in 1999 and travel anywhere in Europe he pleased. That year, the medical director of the airport stated that he did not want to travel because he was scared to leave this bubble world in which he had been living. He was hugely shocked when he finally received the paperwork, according to Dr. Philippe Bargan, the airport's medical director. Imagine what a shock it is when you wait 11 years for something and suddenly in a few minutes you sign some documents and it's done. Employees at Charles de Gaulle Airport would refer to him as Alfred or Sir Alfred because of a typo that appeared in a letter from British immigration officials. He had established himself there. He would clean up in the restrooms for travelers and then take his clothing to the airport laundromat. Reporters observed Mr. Nasseri's passion when discussing the airport as his narrative traveled via French news media and thereafter to outlets around the world. He appeared to rest on the charity of strangers to maintain his residence there. People who heard his tale sent him cash via the postal service. He once received a sleeping bag and a camping mattress from a traveler. In the Spielberg movie, Tom Hanks plays a refugee who, following a military takeover in his imaginary country, is left stateless and detained in New York at Kennedy Airport. In a statement released on Sunday, Charles de Gaulle Airport claimed that Mr. Nasseri had been cared for as much as possible for many years by the entire personnel and community. However, the airport stated that because of his psychological issues, we would have rather that he find a real shelter. Nevertheless,